And we are extremely happy today that Mr. Matthew Wagner from DTE is joining us. And this is actually our first time running it as a full webinar. I think the weather in Michigan is contributed to this. We certainly want it to be in person. But with technology we have today, we at least didn't have to cancel it, and we still can continue with offering it as a webinar. So Mr. Wagner is the manager of renewable energy development for DTE Energy, a Detroit-based diversified energy company involved in the development and management of energy-related businesses and services nationwide. In his current role, Wagner leads a team responsible for overall community engagement, wildlife, and landowner care. Previously, Wagner and his team managed all aspects of wind and solar development, including project site selection, design, obtaining land easements, collection of wind resource information, conduct of environmental and wildlife studies, and various aspects of communication and community relations. Wagner has also been a part of DTE's environmental management team, where he led personnel responsible for the company's environmental compliance. Prior to joining DTE Energy, Wagner worked as an environmental consultant for Delta Environmental Consultants in Farmington Hills, Michigan, and ENCOTEC Incorporated, an Ann Arbor, Michigan-based company. Mr. Wagner has, in total, worked in environmental sustainability space for nearly 40 years. He brings significant experience to us. He secured his Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Engineering from Penn State in 1984 and a Master of Science degree in Environmental Engineering from the University of Michigan in 1991. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Michigan. Mr. Wagner, you're welcome to start delivering your talk.
Okay, thank you, sir. I am going to try to share my screen, but I know Rebecca's standing in the wings ready to save me if I can't get this right. Oops, wrong one already.
I think we're seeing your screen.
Yeah, I have somehow, I'm going to drop that. I have somehow managed to I'm trying to just get back to my normal what's going on here? What are you seeing right now? Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we are seeing the presentation.
Oh, great.
With the first
I'm sorry.
slide.
So I am in the right space. My apologies, all. So again, my name is Matt Wagner, and I'm not. Thank you for reading my bio. I don't need to spend a lot of time there, but I've worked at DTE for about 25 years, and you briefly shared some of the other details of my career. I've been in the renewable space for about 15 years and worked in pretty much all aspects of the renewable space. But what I want to do today is just spend a little bit of time giving you an overview of our renewable energy program. My focus is development. I will probably focus there, but we will also cover some more general aspects of DTE's program. And so why don't we proceed? And I think hopefully Rebecca or Lisa can field questions if they come in. And maybe it makes sense to do those when I'm done presenting. So anyway, without further ado, let's go to the first slide. So we've been on a path to net zero for several years now. It's not an unusual thing to see. A lot of companies are doing this. It's particularly important for an energy company who traditionally, we came up, and when I started at DTE 25 years ago, we were primarily generating power using coal. We are transitioning away from that. You see this schedule, which is our CO2 reductions. We are moving at a pace. What we want to do by 2050 is reach what we call net zero. That's a term that's thrown around a lot these days, but net zero basically means we will never get to zero carbon dioxide emissions. But what we're trying to do is either reduce or absorb the CO2 emissions that we have to be equivalent to the CO2 produced, so that the net effect is zero CO2 emissions. I'm not going to read through the entire chart that you see, but our reductions are pretty steep in the first, or frankly, the next 2 decades. And we're going to do that in a lot of different ways. The first thing we're doing is we right now, and we're going to talk in a little more detail about some of this, but right now we are looking at, over the next 20 years, increasing our renewable energy generation portfolio by over 15,000 megawatts. In addition, we are going to be increasing battery storage. We have very little battery storage right now, but we are going to be adding almost 2,000 megawatts of battery storage, again, over the next 2 decades. We are converting one of our coal plants to natural gas. And then last but not least, we're retiring over 4,000 megawatts of our coal plants. We're accelerating that by 5 to 10 years. Bell River, we're going to convert to gas. And that's going to happen by about 2028. And our Monroe power plant will be retired roughly 10 years ahead of the schedule that we had originally planned for that. That's going to constitute, over the next 10 years, to really get all of this new work off the ground, about a $9 billion investment in Michigan in a lot of different directions. And we believe it's going to support around 25,000 jobs in various capacities as they relate to the renewable energy industry. And the other thing I didn't mention is part of this CO2 reduction will also be a reduction in energy waste, or an increase in energy efficiency of about 1.5% of our portfolio. So that kind of sets the stage. It gives you kind of the big picture of what we're doing. But what I'd like to do now is kind of move to talking in a little more detail. I'll give one sort of brief clean energy commercial for DTE. We are Michigan's renewable energy leader. We kind of arm wrestle for that title with consumers over on the other side of the state. But in our efforts, I think the bottom line is we are putting a lot of focus on producing a lot of energy from renewable sources. We're going to continue to invest in renewable energy assets and the technologies that generate the power. And since 2009, we've already invested over $3 billion in this. Our current Michigan energy portfolio, or renewable energy portfolio, is 18 wind parks, 33 solar parks, and that's enough power to power over 700,000 homes. I do have a graphic, next slide, which is going to show you sort of how these are distributed. So what you're looking at here is it's fairly high level. I'm not going to read every one of these different wind parks or solar parks or other clean energy processes. But what you can see is DTE is already very well established in terms of renewable energy technologies. You'll see a lot of the projects, particularly the wind projects in the thumb of Michigan, and you'll also see quite a few wind projects in central Michigan. The largest reason for these locations is the wind resource. The Thumb and Central Michigan, where these are located, have some really good wind resources. Michigan doesn't have the greatest onshore wind resources, but they have very good resources, and particularly in the Thumb and in Central Michigan. So this is where we started our wind. There are also many solar projects. They're very small projects for the most part, but a lot of solar projects also. And again, so about 1,700 megawatts of wind projects, about 144 solar projects, 144 megawatts of solar projects, and then some smaller efforts around landfill, gas, and biomass projects. So what does a clean energy future look like? Well, in the near term, right now we're looking at Meridian Wind Park, which is in the final phases of commissioning. It's right now the largest wind park at 225 megawatts. That's equivalent to being able to power about 80,000 homes. And it's 77 turbines that will be generating power. That is up in the central part of the state in the Saginaw and Midland area. We're very excited about that. We're getting close to COD, some loose ends to take care of, but we're getting close. The newer investments that we're sort of closing in on right now in terms of clean energy, I mentioned before, we're going to be investing almost $3 billion in some assets over the next 3 years. And that new addition will create a portfolio of renewable energy assets generating enough energy to power about 1 million homes. We have a lot more solar energy planned. In fact, so much solar energy that we're expecting between 10 and 11 million solar modules or panels, a lot of people refer to them as panels, will be installed by 2040. We've already ordered some of those, and those orders are on their way. So we're excited about that and excited for the work we can do. So we're gonna go to the next slide, and I will be able to just kind of give you a feel for what we're working on right now. Now, you'll see the figure on the right, and that has some sort of shaded areas. That's generally where we're working on these projects. For reasons that I'll explain in a second, we're not identifying specifically where all these are because we're still talking to the communities, and we want to respect their sort of, processing of whether they would welcome a project or not. But generally, we're working in all these different areas of the state, and there's a small area in the Upper Peninsula that we're working also. Advanced stage, we have 4 projects where we are in the process of getting final community approvals or actually starting construction. Very excited about that. Mid stage, we've got 18 different projects totaling about 3,000 megawatts of energy. Early stage, 28 different projects at about 4,500 megawatts. And then we're prospecting in various areas. We don't know what the total is going to be there, but we're also looking at some sub-transmission projects. So we want to take advantage of some smaller projects adjacent to some sub-transmission access. All of that totals almost 10,000 megawatts. Now, I mentioned before, I use sort of the shaded areas for this state map because we're just not at a point where we can specifically identify all these projects because they're not necessarily approved. We're still talking to communities about the potential for a project in many of these locations. One of the things that we have learned over the years is we really need to have a strong community engagement focus. So when we go into a community, the first thing we do is we kind of assess the community's receptivity to a project. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We talk to landowners, we talk to businesses, we go to their public meetings, and we ask questions, and we just try to get a sense of, what's the level of interest. And then we go beyond just sort of asking questions, but we engage the landowners and we talk about what a project might look like. We're doing most of that in the solar space, but we're also talking to some communities about some potential future wind as well. We talk to public officials. We talk to some of the influencers in the community because that's important too. They can tell us, you need to talk to so-and-so because they have a lot of land, or, they're going to have questions and they're going to be looking for answers. We network in the community and we try to build trust. We want them to not just think of us as this big company. We want to have a personal relationship with them. And it's a lot easier when you do that, when you're connected to people to help them learn about solar energy or wind energy, and then you can collaborate with them to hopefully, develop a project and actually get one approved. Right now, we're working in more than 8 counties, and we have people engaging with various leaders and others in the community to understand, what the potential for a project is. So the next slide, I hope it works. It should. Although the one thing I'm not sure about is sound. You'll have to tell me if you guys can hear the sound. But this is our first fairly large solar project. It's 48 megawatts. It's located in Lapeer, north of 69. And if you're ever driving 69 between, let's say Flint and Port Huron to the north, you'll see panels, and there's quite a few of them. But I'm going to show this video. It shows the construction of an area of this project. It's very interesting. All right. Well, hopefully that conveys to you to what it takes. Some of the projects that we're developing are probably 2 to 2.5 times the size of that project that you see there. But there's a lot of equipment coming in, and the construction has to be sequenced correctly to be done efficiently and correctly. The only difference between the project that I just showed you being constructed and the projects that we'll be doing is the panels for Lapeer Solar Park, which this is about, have a fixed axis. So the panels never move, and they're angled towards the south so they can optimize the sun as it moves across the sky. The newer projects that we are developing currently will have a single axis tracker, so they will be able to move with the sun, and that will optimize more the solar generation of electricity. So that will be the big difference. And as I said, they will be a bit bigger. They'll be 2, potentially 3 times as large as this project. So I mentioned earlier that we also will be doing more wind development. I mentioned Meridian Wind Park. That's going to be coming online hopefully this year. The turbines are up. We are still working on some commissioning details and some other loose ends that we need to take care of so that we can get the park online. But we're excited about that. We are also contemplating new wind projects. We would like to do some new greenfield projects. And when I refer to greenfield, I mean a project in an area that hasn't had any wind before, or at least wind turbines before. The things we look for is a really good wind resource, but we also look for community receptivity. Community engagement is just as important in a community where you're trying to do a wind project as it is solar. As far as the wind resource, it's important to have a good wind resource so that you're generating a decent amount of energy from the turbines. That varies. Frankly, some of the best wind resources areas, as I mentioned before, in the Thumb and in central Michigan are already being used by wind projects. So, but there are technology changes. The turbine rotors are getting larger, and the turbines are getting taller, and that helps us take advantage of more wind at a slightly higher elevation. And that's one way to optimize in an area where the wind resource is not optimal or excellent, but good. We're also doing something we call development transfers. We've been doing these for more than 10 years. There are a lot of other people or companies developing projects in Michigan. And so in some cases, what we'll typically do is we run what we call an RFP, or request for proposals, and third-party developers will submit their proposals in response to our request, and then we'll evaluate them and potentially get some projects. And I am misspeaking a little bit. That's more of a finished project process where we can select third party. But let me back up and say, for a development transfer, those projects are not that far down the road. And so a third party might bring accumulations of land to us and say, you know, we would like to talk to you about potentially taking over this project at the development transfer level. So there is a distinction, and I misspoke initially on that. Another way to get more wind development done is to use the repowering approach. And basically what that is we go to a wind park that's already there, and we evaluate what can we change about that park in terms of equipment. Maybe it's new rotors, maybe it's an entire new power train, which is generator and gearboxes and the whole nacelle. Maybe it's a whole new turbine that's maybe slightly taller or has a different type of rotor. But as I suggest, it might be partial, or it might be a full replacement of a turbine or turbines in a project. We still have to get local approvals, because when you install this equipment, it does take fairly large equipment to transport it and erect the turbines. And so you still need to talk to the local municipalities about how that will get done. Last but not least, you know, these are typically operating wind parks. And so you're going to need to collaborate with your operations folks on how to do that in the optimal way. Last but not least, we're looking at project expansion. Is there an opportunity to add additional turbines into a wind park? Local approvals are important there too. And we also would need to talk to landowners. Typically, when we do these projects, we have agreements with landowners, and you know, they like wind. It's very compatible with their operations, but there is a disruption during construction. And so we like to offer the landowners incentives to encourage them to participate if we have to make changes. But then, as before with repowering, we would have to collaborate with operations folks. So, you know, that's what we have in store. And this is not just in 2023, it'll go beyond that, but we're kind of launching some of these activities again in 2023. And the objective is we would like to get as much renewable energy moving through the development pipeline as we can. So I mentioned the conversion of the Bell River Power Plant, coal plant, to gas. We do have a plan for that. However, we just opened last year an 1,100 megawatt new gas plant, Blue Water Energy Center. It's a state-of-the-art natural gas combined cycle plant, and it's one of the most efficient in the US. Natural gas is very, very important during this clean energy transition. I don't think it's any surprise. People know that wind and solar are intermittent generation resources, and having base load to affect that clean energy transition is very important. And so when I say base load, I'm basically talking about a 24/7 electricity generation source. This plant on its own will generate enough power on a 24/7 basis to power almost 900,000 homes. So we're very excited about the operation of the Blue Water Energy Center, and that's going to, again, play a critical role during this transition. And then last but not least, I mentioned how important working with communities is, and so this presentation would be remiss without sort of a selection of slides that just exemplify what we do in communities. And I'm just going to run through these really quickly. We support graduations. You're looking at the Merrill Vandals graduation on the upper left. In the center, we were awarded something for supporting the Future Farmers of America on a project. We have folks going into classrooms all the time, again, moving from left to right on your screen. We do a fun run up in Huron County. Some of our access roads to our turbines can be as much as a half mile or a mile long to get to the turbine that's out in the field. And so there's one school, Eccles School in Huron County, that every year we do a fun run, and they bring their students and they do a race, and we sponsor that. The picture in the middle is the robotics competition, and we try to sponsor those when we can, both locally and statewide. We also participate in junior livestock auctions. So when I first got involved in the renewable energy business, one of the folks that worked in the communities with me said, "You guys need to participate in these things." My leaders thought it was really funny that I was out buying steer and hogs and sheep and other kind of animals, but these are things that are very important to the communities that we work in. And so we want to partner, we want to be a good neighbor. And so this, that's sort of a different way to engage the community, but it's something we do every year now as we go to these auctions. Young people work really hard to raise these animals. They take a lot of pride in those and their animals. And so we wholeheartedly participate in these auctions, and it's actually pretty fun. On the bottom of the page, the picture of the fire truck and the gentleman standing in the foreground. Several years back, we had the opportunity to partner with another developer to buy some life-saving equipment. And we were able to contribute about $10,000 between the developer and DTE to buying these pieces of equipment. If I blew up that picture, you'd see these folks, these men and women grinning from ear to ear because it's state-of-the-art equipment. If they have to go to an automobile crash scene or something like that, all of this stuff helps them do their jobs and helps them save lives. And so that's a source of that's a huge source of excitement for them and a source of pride for us that we could help them in that way. The picture in the bottom middle is just a picture of us planting trees, and then the last one on the right lower corner is one of our DT employees working and serving a holiday lunch, which benefited folks in one of our communities. So, community engagement is part and parcel of what we do. Getting community approvals is a very critical component of the process of getting renewable energy done in Michigan. Not everybody wants it, and so we take it very seriously. We don't just come in and say, "Hey, we want to do a project," and then we disappear. We try to partner and want to be a member of the community. And so that's why I put a lot of emphasis, a whole slide dedicated to this, because it's very important in the whole process. So, that wraps up my presentation. There's a lot of stuff there. I didn't get into tremendous detail. I'm happy to try to answer questions if I can, and if I can't, there's always the opportunity to circle back. If I can't answer a question for you, I can circle back and get the information to folks after the fact. So I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. We have a few questions that have been submitted. So I will start with those, and then once you're finished asking, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 of them so far.
Great.
The first one that was submitted asked why doesn't, and this was submitted prior to your presentation. So
okay.
It says, why doesn't DTE encourage more distributed solar rooftop generation?
That is a great question. One of the reasons for that is because when let me back up. The biggest reason why is doing rooftop generation is very expensive. Doing these larger projects is much more cost effective. And so that's really the biggest reason. We don't discourage folks from doing it, but because of the cost of it just from a large scale renewable energy development standpoint, it is not the best approach in terms of meeting the needs of all the customers in our service territory.
Okay. The next question we have is the individual was interested in incentives that for nonprofits to install solar or install energy conserving equipment. Not really,
Yeah.
I guess, a question, but maybe does DTE have incentives?
Well, we had a program some time ago. It was very popular, I have to say. One thing that everybody should understand is all of our projects and expenses that go towards generation need to be approved by the state. We did have a program at one time that provided incentives for smaller solar generation. That was discontinued some time ago. I will double check this, and then Rebecca, if I could, we can get that back out to you. I'm not aware of any incentives right now that we have, but I don't want to misspeak. So I will double check that, and I can circle back and, perhaps there's a way to share that back out after the fact.
Perfect. The next one was, what are your thoughts or DTE's thoughts on nuclear energy as a renewable energy source?
Well, we have a nuclear operation right now, and nuclear is a clean energy source. And so I don't want to discourage anybody from that. I mean, my personal opinion is nuclear is a very viable source of clean energy. One of the challenges for us is the licensing process and the construction process for nuclear these days is extremely high. And so at this time, again, I mentioned earlier that we have to have all of our projects approved by the state. And part of that approval is being able to demonstrate to the state that we're going to be building projects that are reliable, safe, affordable, and cleaner. And the affordability piece is just as important as all those other things. And so our challenge is, if we wanted to do more nuclear, we'd have to show a very cost-effective program, and nuclear is extremely expensive right now for a variety of reasons, not excluding things like safety concerns and all the requirements around that. Our Fermi 2 plant, I think, is one of the best in the country, and they run a tight ship. Doing a newer plant is extremely expensive compared to the operations at Fermi. And so that's one of the concerns that causes us to probably not move as quickly on that as an option for the future, at least at this point.
Okay, the next question is, what % of DTE's new solar projects are single axis trackers versus fixed tilt?
That's a great question. Well, right now, all of our projects are fixed tilt. And so right now, I could say 100% are fixed tilt. Actually, we did just have one come online, our first larger project, and we don't own it and operate it. It's operated by another. But all the future projects will be fixed, single axis tracker. So, the percentage is kind of hard right now because all the projects, with the exception of one that are installed, are fixed tracker. They're relatively small. There is one large project that's on single axis. All the future ones, and so thousands of megawatts that are going in the next 10 to 20 years, will be at least single axis tracker. Potentially something more if the technology avails itself and it looks more cost effective and optimizes operation and generation. But for now, I would say in the future, almost all will be a single axis tracker.
Okay, so next, and forgive me if you might have addressed this in the previous comment about nuclear. I'm trying to run the webinar and may have missed.
Yeah, no,
the
you're doing
answer.
great. You're doing great, so no problem.
How much of DTE power generated is from nuclear? And what are the plans for nuclear in the future?
Yes, so I did kind of answer it before, but the added question is how much of it? It's about 10% of our capacity right now is nuclear. And unless the costs come way down in some way, or they figure out a more cost-effective way to deploy nuclear, I'm not sure. I'm not saying it's an impossibility, and I don't think our leaders would say that we'll never do nuclear, but we have to have a nuclear project that's cost-effective and competitive with other viable energy generation alternatives. If we don't have that, it's unlikely we'll do another nuclear project, but there's no guarantees on that. If who knows where technology will take us as we move forward. So it's very possible that they'll come up with a technology that's more cost-effective, that brings nuclear into sort of the space of possibilities for the future for DTE and other energy companies.
Okay. What are the challenges for solar and wind farms, and how do you address them?
Wow, that's a big question, or that's a big answer. There's a lot of different challenges. I'll kind of start with the top three. So the main focus for me is, as I mentioned, sort of the last slide in my presentation, the main focus for me is community engagement and community approvals. Right now, community approvals are a challenge. There are people who have either a political interest or another interest in stopping these projects. These projects are very beneficial for communities. They bring tax revenues, they bring revenues for landowners. They represent the opportunity for the community to contribute to a cleaner energy future. So there's a lot of benefits for these projects. There are some landowners, and I know for some landowners who don't want these projects, don't want them because they're on the land. And when you have a solar project, those acres that have a solar project, you can't farm those acres. But there are many landowners who are much older, many landowners who have children who don't necessarily want to take on the farm or continue to farm. Those landowners are very interested because solar energy represents a way to continue to use their land. And so, I have a healthy respect for that. I have a healthy respect for landowners who choose not to do this as well. But community engagement for solar is a challenge for some of those reasons. For wind, it's a little bit different. There are some people who the wind turbines arguably really change the landscape. And so there are some people who are not ready for that change. Again, wind is similar to solar in that it brings a lot of incentives and opportunities for the community, both on an individual basis and on a community-wide basis. There are some people who don't care for the way the wind turbines look. There are some people who talk about the sound from wind turbines and something we call shadow flicker. Those are all real things, and different people have different sort of thresholds for what's okay and what's not. And part of what we do when we try to cite a project and get it approved is we do all kinds of scientific studies on the shadow flicker and sound, and we measure decibels under all different kinds of conditions and model all kinds of extremes and try to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the local laws and state requirements and federal permits and all those things. But it's still a challenge. And there are times when, yes, we have to do our best to help people understand what we're doing, answer all their questions, make them comfortable. Sometimes communities still reject these projects, and we've seen there's a lot more of that. I will say that there are folks who are out there and they're not telling the truth about what's going on in the renewable energy industry. And that's a challenge, and we accept that challenge. And our job is to educate people locally and help them understand that we believe it is really a good opportunity, and it contributes to, you know, the energy future, the clean energy future in Michigan. A second item that can be a challenge is, you know, all of these projects need to be connected to the energy grid. And this is the same all around the country. But in Michigan, we have to connect to the grid, and that process it's an important process. There are people who operate the grid who need to make sure that the load on the lines and the power going to the places where it's needed is properly balanced so that it works effectively, and so that there aren't brownouts or blackouts. And I don't think we approach those types of situations, barring, you know, storms, which we've all lived through in the past, and we've had our power out for a day or two, and in some cases longer. DTE works hard to minimize that. But the challenge for getting into what we call the grid queue is there's a lot of energy projects right now, particularly solar projects, that want to be evaluated and get approved so they can connect to the grid. And that's a high amount of congestion for the entity that reviews the projects to review. And so right now, these reviews, from the day you submit your application to the time when you approve them, could be as much as 2 years, plus or minus. And so, you know, you're starting these projects very, very early. There's a lot of uncertainties, and you're waiting, you know, months and months and months, and in some cases more than 2 years to get word on whether your project's going to be approved or not. Now, as the project goes through the review cycle, there are sort of checkpoints that indicate whether you're going to have success or not, but it's still a long process. And so factoring that timing into your project and factoring a lot of other things in is a challenge. And you know, that's one of the hurdles that we have to get over. The other of the top three, I'd say, is just the equipment. I mean, I talked earlier about how many solar modules we think we'll need by 2040, when we hope to have most of these projects deployed. That's a lot of panels. And so just logistically, you know, if you think about the whole supply chain, it starts with manufacturing them. Right now, we don't have a lot of manufacturing of solar modules in the United States. So one of the things we have to factor in is the transportation and all the details of acquiring, ordering solar modules from overseas. Then you have to think about the transport across the ocean and all those things. So then when you have this many panels, sometimes a site is going to be ready for the panels and you can take them straight to the location. Sometimes it won't be, and you're going to have to store them. And if we're building at the magnitude and the pace that we want to build, inevitably there are going to be times when we need to store panels and we're going to need a lot of storage. And so, you know, that timeline from the point of ordering the panels to getting delivery on them, again, can be anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. And in some cases, it may be even longer. In some cases, it's much shorter. But the other thing that makes ordering this equipment a challenge is, again, a lot of people are doing this, not just in Michigan, but all over the country. And so there's a high demand. And as long as the high demand remains, you know, it's going to be hard for the suppliers to keep up. And so that too is another timeline challenge that we just have to factor into how we develop our projects and when we start and when we invest and all those things. So those are probably the top three: is the community approval process, the interconnect process, which is, you know, getting approval to get on the electric grid, and then the supply chain challenges.
Rebecca, let me actually take from here, ask a couple of other questions, I think, just to make sure we manage this within the time we have.
Sure.
One question came is if there are any initiatives to lower the bill costs, and if renewable energy play into role, you know, any role in this, lowering the actual cost of to the consumer.
Yeah, DTE is always striving to manage those costs. And again, one of the main reasons is because we have an obligation to the state, and particularly our customers, to give them affordable energy. There are some things that I think that are going to help. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce the amount, we're trying to increase energy efficiency, both at, the generation point and the point of usage by the customers. That will help simply be if less energy is needed because you're using more energy efficient appliances, or you're choosing to use more power at times of day when the cost is less, that will help bring down prices. I mean, there are costs of generating energy, and those will remain a challenge. We do think renewable energy is cost effective. If it wasn't, we would have trouble getting the state agencies to approve our projects. But it's a challenge. I won't deny that. But DTE is always proceeding with the mind on affordability. And frankly, solar and wind at this time are on par with natural gas energy for cost effectiveness.
Good. One other question about, and I think it's an important question, about the impact of vehicle electrification on demand, as we move into the future.
Can you repeat the question again?
Actually, the question itself is DTE planning to have solar stations for electrical vehicles, especially in rural areas?
Yes. Yeah, that'll take some time. And we do have some already in rural areas, but there's a deployment plan. I don't work in the electric vehicle space, but I can tell you there's a lot of focus on where they need to be, how accessible the chargers are, how many chargers are there. That's a focus, I think, for both consumers energy and DTE, but there's also a larger organization or consortia that's working, I think they call it the Electric Vehicle Highway, and they're trying to think even beyond Michigan. And so, if you travel across I-80 in Ohio or Pennsylvania, there are people in all those states trying to think about how do we do this so that we can encourage the use of electric vehicles and ensure that the availability of charging stations does not become an impediment or a discouragement to buying and operating an electric vehicle. So there's a lot going on there. That's something that there are folks who could talk all day about this. Obviously they're not on the call right now, but there's a lot of focus on that.
Just a couple of other questions. I think one of them is, do you have any, do you know of any regulatory changes that you would like to see that will boost generation of the renewable energy?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question. And being one of the guys who tries to figure out, one of the people who tries to figure out how to get renewable energy projects approved, I think I'd like to see a way to help communities understand the importance of these projects in a way that it's easier to get these projects approved. I'm not saying that a renewable energy developer or DTE wants to not have to work hard to get their projects approved. But the pathway to approval right now is a little bit of a challenge. We completely respect the value that Michigan has on local control and landowner rights, and we want to work within that sort of framework. But we think there's ways within that framework that we can help local leaders and communities understand. And so I would love to see changes to the process of siting locally in Michigan so that it would be a little bit more predictable where we can get a project approved and where we can't. So there's a lot of details to that conversation, and I don't mean to, it's not an easy solution, but I'm eager to see everybody who's involved, all the stakeholders come together and figure out a way to create more successes for getting projects done.
Very good. One question I have actually is if you have any advice you can give to our students in terms of getting them ready for careers in sustainability as we move into the future?
That's an awesome question. Well, there's a lot of things. If it was me and based on what I learned, because I wasn't thinking about all these things, and renewable energy wasn't a big thing when I graduated many years ago. But the first thing is I would seek out and learn on my own about renewable energy. I would also reach out to companies and renewable energy experts and say, hey, can I have a minute of your time? Even if you only have 15 minutes, can we talk a little bit? The other thing is if you are successful, getting a renewable energy professional's attention, come with good questions for them, ask good questions and, encourage the dialogue, and start figuring out what companies are in the middle of this. If you really want to do this, start figuring out what companies are in the middle of this and do your research and understand what they're doing. If there are opportunities to take a technical course on how a wind turbine works or a solar panel works, take some of those courses. I was talking to somebody who works on our team now, and they're doing a fantastic job. And I do a lecture at U of M once a year in a class where they think about all the different sources of energy generation, and they do a session on renewable energy. And they invite a couple of people, including myself, into, talk about siting and talk about what DTE is doing, much like I'm doing today with you guys. And this individual this person was in the class, and they came up to me after and they said, what can I do to come work at DTE? Now, and they were persistent, I have to say, and they have done a great job, but they invested in understanding what was going on. They discovered a love and an interest in sustainability and renewable energy, and they took a lot of classes, and they did some sort of extracurricular things. Now, just because you do this doesn't guarantee that you're going to land a position in any particular company, but the odds of you succeeding are going to be far greater if you take the initiative and are proactive about that kind of thing.
I think one other question also that I have is, are there any areas of research that you think DTE is interested to fund, or do you think in the overall area of sustainability and renewable energy that you think, especially for professors in universities, that can actually help them succeed in securing external grants? So what do you think are the areas of interest that, for this kind of research?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of thoughts about what can help. Just to kind of qualify this, DTE is not necessarily, a funder. We're not sort of a research focus. Our primary objective is to supply energy to our customers and do it in as I said, a reliable, safe, cleaner, and affordable way. But there's a couple things that come to mind in response to your question. One is, solar panels could be more efficient. They're pretty efficient now, but people are always pushing the technology to get better. And so an area is, how do we make solar panels more efficient? An innovation that's come out in the last couple years is what they call bifacial panels. So the panels they have modules on both sides of the panel, so that the top side is receiving solar rays, sun rays, and creating energy. But the bottom side is also taking advantage of the reflection of the sun, and you get a little bit of bonus generation on the underside. And it's not everybody's using those yet in their developments, but I think it's becoming more and more popular. So that's a great example of an innovation that somebody came up with. I don't know when, but it was creative thinking. On the wind turbine side, turbines are designed to be strong, but they also have to be lightweight because you have to lift them really high. I think there's always a need to make things that are strong but lighter. I also think there's a need, as turbines get taller, to figure out technologies for the towers that, make a more reliable structure on your wind turbine. So, there's probably a lot more, I am sure. But those are some examples that come to mind right off the top of my head. Anything that reduces material costs, installation costs, transportation costs, and sometimes that has to do with the weight of the materials, or anything that improves the efficiency of the generation, is often going to lead to a cost reduction, and that improves the chances that that technology will be selected for the future. And if you're in the middle of that and you're one of the researchers who comes up with that, that's good for you. So I hope that that's not a comprehensive answer, but it gives some ideas.
No, that's great. And I don't see any other questions in the chat, question and answer chat. So we really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate your your presentation. Sorry about the weather that you couldn't come here. We would have loved to have you and taking you through our fascinating facility here to just show you around. Maybe we'll bring you some other time whenever you're available. You're most welcome to come and visit us in person, and we'll be so excited to show you around and tell you what we're doing. But for the
that
time
would be
being,
fantastic.
we look forward to that. Rebecca, I'm sure will help to arrange that if whenever you're available. But on behalf of the faculty and myself and Eastern Michigan University, we're very thankful for you to deliver this presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend ahead.
Same to all of you.